Hey everybody, what's going on? So in this section, we're going to talk about another powerful sales technique, and it's going to be called padding. Now, padding is going to be used to help you ask higher quality questions, and it's also going to help you make the other person feel comfortable with you asking them that question. Now, when you ask hard questions, padding is going to be a technique used to make it easier for the listener. And when I say easier, I mean it's going to make the other person feel comfortable around you, especially when you're asking more difficult questions and you're trying to get into the customer's emotional state. Now, padding by definition is basically a statement you're going to put in front of your question to make it more softer, right? So I use the metaphor soft as in it's not hard, like it's not a hard landing. That doesn't feel abrupt. It doesn't make people cringe, but it's very nice, subtle, and soft. So here are some examples of padding, right? So before you ask a question or someone says something and you want to respond, you could say, "That's a good point, but have you ever thought about da 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 da," right? Or "That makes sense," and then you ask a question. "I'm glad you asked that." Then you ask a question. Or it could be, "What do you mean when you say," and you continue. "I appreciate your question." Then you ask a question. "I'm a little confused on," "I understand." I hear a lot of people say that. So these are not only phrases that you can use to make sure the other person feels like they're being heard. The more people feel like they're heard, the more they feel like what they say matters. And if that happens, then you're building that rapport. Not only does it do that, but it makes a transition into you asking the next question. And it's going to be a lot more likely that the prospect is going to answer your question truthfully. So let's go ahead and get into some examples of using this padding technique combined with some of the questions that we showed you earlier in this course. "That's a good question. Can you explain why this is important to you?" "That makes sense. And why is this important to you?" "I'm glad you asked that. Let's say we can deliver this to you in 2 weeks. What would the next step be from here?" "I appreciate your question. Just curious, is there a specific reason for why you asked?" "I understand your perspective. Now, if we could do that for you, what would be the next step?" So you can see from all these questions, right? I put a little padding before the question where if somebody asks you something, instead of just answering their question with a question immediately, like let's say the customer says, "What's the price," right? "How much is this going to cost?" And if I just say, "Can you explain why this is important to you?" That does work. But if you say something before that, you add some padding. You say, "That's a good question that you ask about pricing. But before we get into that, can you explain why pricing is so important to you? Or is there a budget that you're working with?" So that padding is that extra thing you can put in front of your question to make it transition a lot more nicely. Obviously, you want to use padding again when you're asking surface, business, or personal questions, right? So I already showed you how to ask questions from all these different levels of the pyramid. So just remember that you can add the padding anytime you want. Anytime you feel like you need to soften that transition and make it easier for the prospect to listen to what you're saying, that's exactly where you want to put it. So really, it's up to your judgment on when you feel it's right to use the padding. So with that said, that's everything we have to cover when it comes to using the padding technique. And go ahead and just try it out, see if it works, and see if it makes a difference in any of your sales meetings. So with that said, that's everything we got to cover, and I am going to see you in the next lesson.